Okay, if you thought the news has been intense lately, you are not alone. And today we're diving into something with huge GE implications. Iran firing missiles directly at Israel. We're talking hundreds of missiles, even some that are, get this, hypersonic. We're cutting through the noise today. We've got firsthand accounts, breaking news, expert military analysis. Let's make sense of this together.
Absolutely. This is a complete game changer. The whole region is on edge. And frankly, the ripple effects, this could impact the entire world.
I think that's what's got everyone so on edge. When we say missile attack, those are scary words, but what does that actually look like, for people on the ground?
Imagine you're in Israel, it's Tuesday night, people are just going about their lives, and suddenly air raid sirens are blaring, the sky's lighting up with these missiles. Hundreds of thousands of people are rushing for bomb shelters. This is an entire nation put on high alert.
And it's heartbreaking, even with early reports saying Israel, thankfully, seems to have avoided massive casualties. One Palestinian civilian in the West Bank was killed by shrapnel. Just a devastating reminder that conflict on this scale, there are always innocent lives caught in the crossfire.
That's the tragic reality. It's like a chain reaction. What happens in one place has these huge repercussions elsewhere. And to really grasp this attack, we've got to look at the bigger picture. This isn't happening in a vacuum. This is directly connected to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza A&D. There are rising tensions between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's like adding fuel to a fire that's already raging.
So we're not talking about an isolated incident here. This is part of a much bigger and more complex conflict. And Iran, they're not exactly hiding their motives for this attack, are they?
Not at all. Everything coming out of Tehran points to one thing: revenge. They're seeking retaliation for the recent killings of some very prominent figures in Hamas, Hezbollah, and even within their own ranks in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. This wasn't just a random act. This is a calculated power move.
And it's chilling. There are reports that Iranian state TV is actually showing celebrations after the attack.
This is about more than just military objectives. It's deeply ideological. The IRGC, the branch of the Iranian military that carried out this attack, they answer directly to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Their actions, their very existence, are meant to project this image of strength, of defiance on the world stage.
So Israel's promising a strong response, but they're being very careful about what they're saying publicly. You get the sense that every word is being weighed very carefully right now.
They have to be. Israel is in an incredibly difficult position. On one hand, they need to project strength and resolve, not just to deter Iran, but to reassure their own people who are facing this direct threat.
But on the other hand,
But if they overreact, if they retaliate too forcefully, it could easily spiral into an all-out regional war, maybe even drawing in global superpowers.
Yeah.
We could be talking about devastating consequences here. This isn't just about military targets, it's about global stability.
the whole world is watching, waiting to see what Israel will do next. And speaking of the world stage, there's another huge factor at play here: the U.S. elections. How do you see this impacting the race for the White House?
This attack is a major foreign policy challenge, and both candidates are going to use it to their advantage. It plays right into existing narratives. The current administration is being criticized for appearing weak on the world stage, while the opposition is seizing the opportunity to project an image of strength, of leadership.
Yeah, it's like this attack just threw a grenade into the election. Everything's even more heightened now. It's not just about who has the best plan for, healthcare or the economy anymore. It's about who can lead on the world stage, who seems, presidential in a crisis.
And this is a big crisis. So the stakes just got even higher for everybody. It's not just regional stability, but global leadership hanging in the balance. But stepping back out from the U.S. for a sec, what about the international community? We've heard strong condemnation from the U.S. government, but what does that actually mean in practical terms?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because history shows us that words without action, they often don't mean much. Remember back in 2013, that horrific chemical weapons attack in Syria? The whole world condemned it. But when it came to actually doing something, crickets.
And that probably had consequences, right? Like emboldened some actors on the world stage, showed them they could get away with stuff.
Exactly. And that's the fear here, that this could become a pattern. But here's where things get interesting. This time, the U.S. has already confirmed that 2 of their Navy destroyers, these are serious warships, equipped with top-of-the-line missile defense systems. They were directly involved in helping Israel defend against the Iranian attack.
So the U.S. is putting their money where their mouth is. They're not just talking tough, they're backing it up with some serious firepower. But what about our allies in Europe? What are they saying?
Well, the European Union, They're calling for a ceasefire, an immediate one, across the entire region. And you can understand why, right? They're terrified that this thing could spiral out of control. But here's the thing. Europe, they don't have the same kind of military muscle that the U.S. does, and their relationship with Iran, well, it's complicated. They've got that nuclear deal and a lot of economic ties.
So it's this balancing act for them, trying to exert influence without rocking the boat too much. But let's bring it back to Israel for a moment. They've promised a strong response, but how do you even begin to counter an attack of this scale? We're talking hundreds of missiles here.
You're right. This is a whole different ballgame. But Israel, they've been preparing for this kind of scenario for decades, literally. They've got this multi-layered defense system. You've probably heard of the Iron Dome.
Oh yeah, the Iron Dome, sure. But how effective can that really be against such a massive coordinated attack? We're not talking about just a handful of rockets here.
Okay, so here's the thing about the Iron Dome. It's not just one thing, it's this whole network, right? Think of it like layers of defense. For short-range rockets, the kind that Hamas often fires from Gaza, you have the actual Iron Dome system itself, and it's pretty darn effective. Then for medium-range threats, they've got the Brock 8 system. And for the long-range stuff, the really scary stuff like those ballistic missiles Iran just launched, they've got the Arrow system.
So it's like a three-pronged shield, each layer designed to take on a different kind of threat.
That's it. But, and this is a big but, even with the best tech in the world, intercepting hundreds of ballistic missiles, especially with some potentially being hypersonic, that's a whole other level. It'd be like trying to, I don't know, catch 100 tennis balls being fired at you from all directions all at once. Some are going to get through. It's just the law of averages.
And in this case, some of those tennis balls are moving at 5 times the speed of sound.
Exactly. It's incredibly difficult. So here's the thing. Israel's response is not going to be just about defense. They have to show they can hit back and hit back hard as a deterrent. And the big question everyone's asking is, what will that look like?
Right, because what they do next could have huge repercussions. So what are the options? What's on the table?
Well, one option that's definitely being considered, according to sources close to the situation, is targeted airstrikes. They could go after Iranian military facilities, especially the ones linked to their ballistic missile program.
That's hitting them where it hurts. But that's incredibly risky, isn't it? I mean, striking Iran directly.
It would be a huge gamble. We could be talking about a full-blown war. But it's important to remember that Israel has a history of, let's call it, proactive action when they feel threatened.
Right. They've faced existential threats before, haven't they?
Many times. Since its founding, Israel has been surrounded by, well, let's just say, unfriendly neighbors. They've fought wars, dealt with constant terrorism, the whole 9 yards. And that's shaped how they view security. They're more willing to take preemptive action if they think their very existence is on the line.
So striking Iran, while incredibly risky, would be in line with their past actions. It would definitely send a message. But what are the other options? There have to be other things they're considering.
Absolutely. Another possibility is that they might go after Iranian assets or their proxies in neighboring countries. Think Syria, Lebanon, places like that.
So a more measured approach, going after Iranian influence in the region without actually attacking Iran itself.
Right. Less chance of sparking an all-out war. But, and there's always a but, even that carries risks. It could still escalate, pull in other actors, destabilize the entire region.
It's like this whole situation is a powder keg and one wrong move could set it off. But in all of this talk about military strategy and geopolitics, it's easy to forget about the human cost of this conflict.
You're absolutely right. We can't lose sight of that. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines, the analysis, the what-ifs, but at the end of the day, it's real people's lives being torn apart.
Families huddling in bomb shelters, terrified for their lives. Communities in Gaza already devastated by weeks of conflict, and that image, that heartbreaking image of that Palestinian civilian killed by shrapnel hundreds of miles from where those missiles were even aimed. It's a stark reminder that war is brutal, it's chaotic, and there are always unintended consequences.
Always. And it's not just the immediate casualties either. The trauma, the psychological scars, the economic devastation. These things have a ripple effect that can last for generations. It's heartbreaking.
It really is. So knowing all of this, with everything we've discussed, what should we be watching for as this situation unfolds? What are the key indicators, the things that will tell us where this is all headed?
Well, honestly, trying to predict what's going to happen next is like, I don't know, trying to read tea leaves. There are so many moving parts here, so many different actors with their own agendas.
Yeah, it does feel that way, like anything could happen. But are there any patterns, any indicators we can look for to get a sense of where things might be headed?
Well, the biggest wild card here, obviously, is Israel. Their response and how they choose to respond, that's going to be the biggest factor. How quickly do they act? How big of a response? And who or what do they target? All of that is going to tell us a lot.
So we need to be watching Israel very, very closely. What are some of the specific things we should be looking for? Give us the inside scoop.
Well, for starters, any statements coming out of Jerusalem, especially from Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant, those guys, they don't just, shoot from the hip. Every word they say is carefully chosen. Their rhetoric, it's going to give us a sense of their thinking.
So reading between the lines, watching for any hints they drop.
Exactly. But it's not just what they're saying, it's what they're doing. Are we seeing troop movements, military deployments? Are they putting their Air Force on high alert? Those are all signs that things could be about to get real.
Like batten down the hatches, we're in for a bumpy ride kind of thing.
You got it. But it's not all about the military stuff, right? Remember those back channels we were talking about?
Yeah.
The diplomatic efforts? Those are going to be absolutely crucial right now.
So behind the scenes, what's happening? Is there any hope that diplomacy can avert a full-blown catastrophe here?
Okay, so here's the deal. Diplomacy in this part of the world, it's not for the faint of heart. The U.S., even though they're standing strong with Israel publicly, they do not want another war in the Middle East. Not on their watch. So behind the scenes, they're working the phones, talking to the Europeans, maybe even some backdoor channels to Tehran, trying to find a way to de-escalate things, to find some kind of off-ramp.
It's like trying to put out a fire with a thimble, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the tensions between Iran and the West, the whole nuclear deal thing, it's like there's no trust there.
No, you're right. It's not going to be easy. But remember, even during the Cold War, when things were about as tense as you can possibly imagine, the U.S. and the Soviets, they still talked. They had these back channels, these lines of communication, because they knew that miscalculation, that a mistake could be catastrophic. And right now, the stakes are just as high.
Let's hope they find a way to talk, to find some common ground before it's too late. But even if we avoid the worst case scenario in the short term, it feels like this attack, it's changed things, shifted the landscape.
It has. I think we've crossed the threshold here. Iran has shown they're willing to directly target Israel with, frankly, a level of firepower we haven't seen before. Yeah. And that's going to have a ripple effect.
Like, how does Israel even process that? How does that change their thinking, their strategy going forward?
It has to, right? They've always viewed Iran as this existential threat, but now it's no longer theoretical. It's real. It's tangible. Yeah. And it means that Israel is going to be even more on edge, more likely to act decisively, maybe even preemptively, to protect themselves.
So a more assertive, maybe even more aggressive Israel on the world stage. And what about the other players in the region? How does this impact them?
Well, one possibility is that it pushes everyone closer to their respective corners. We could see a strengthening of alliances, with the U.S. and Israel drawing even closer together, maybe even some Arab states joining that fold.
So a kind of solidifying of the existing power structures.
Potentially.
Yeah.
But there's also the flip side of that coin, right? This could push Iran even further away from the West, drive them deeper into the arms of, say, Russia and China.
So the global balance of power could be affected by this too. It's like this one attack has set off a chain reaction with implications far beyond just Israel and Iran.
And the thing is, we have no idea how this is all going to play out. It's like that old saying about chaos theory, right? A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, and suddenly you have a hurricane in Florida. These events, they have a way of creating unintended consequences, ripples that we can't even begin to predict.
It's unnerving, to say the least. So with all of this in mind, for those of us out here trying to make sense of it all, what's the most important thing to keep in mind? What should we be focusing on in the days and weeks to come?
I think the key here is to look beyond the headlines. Don't get bogged down in the day-to-day news cycle, the constant barrage of information. Pay attention to the bigger picture. Watch what's happening diplomatically, pay attention to the rhetoric coming from all sides, and be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers.
Because in a situation like this, there are no easy answers.
Exactly. And remember, knowledge is power. Staying informed, being able to cut through the noise and understand the complexities, that's more important now than ever.
I couldn't agree more. This has been a real eye-opener, a true deep dive. Thanks for walking us through it all.
My pleasure. Anytime.
And to all of you listening, stay engaged, stay informed, and we'll be back soon with more deep dives into the stories shaping our world.